Welcome to Blackman Folk Tales. Kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel. The city of Lagos had always been known for its bustling energy, its unending traffic, and the restless ambition of men who wanted to carve out empires in the face of competition. Chief Obinna Okafor was one of those men who once stood tall among Lagos' elite businessmen. Born in Enugu and raised by hardworking parents who taught him the value of honesty and diligence, Obinna had built his transport company from a single rickety Peugeot bus into a fleet of over 100 luxury buses that connected Lagos to the east, the north, and even neighboring countries. His company, Okafor Motors, had become a household name, employing over 500 Nigerians and giving hope to countless families. Newspapers once hailed him as the people's chief because he never forgot his humble beginnings. But the higher he climbed, the more dangerous the waters became. Unknown to him, lurking in the shadows was Chief Alexander Adeyemi, popularly called Grayson in corporate circles, whose name alone made younger entrepreneurs tremble. Adeyemi was a billionaire with fingers dipped into oil, banking, and real estate. He was feared as much as he was admired, for everyone knew that once he set his eyes on a business, he either bought it or buried it. The rivalry between Obinna and Adeyemi began subtly, with whispers of competition over government contracts, until one fateful year when everything Obinna had worked for began to collapse like a house built on sand. It started with a series of strange events that, at first, seemed like coincidence. Several of Obinna's buses were mysteriously impounded for regulatory violations that his lawyers swore were fabricated. Key contracts he had secured with state governments were suddenly cancelled without explanation. Bank loans he depended on for expansion were recalled at suspiciously short notice, plunging his company into financial strain. At first, Obinna fought back, calling in favors and pleading with regulators, but each attempt only deepened his frustrations. He began to notice a pattern. Every problem seemed to push his business into the waiting arms of Grayson Group, Adeyemi's conglomerate. Rumors spread among the business elite that Adeyemi was deliberately crippling Okafor Motors in order to buy it at a cheap price. Friends who once celebrated with Chief Obinna began to distance themselves, whispering that to stand by him was to court destruction. Even members of his extended family who had depended on his generosity suddenly melted away when the storm raged too hard. Within months, the once vibrant empire Obinna had built began to crumble. Newspapers that once hailed him now carried mocking headlines, painting him as careless and incompetent. In his quiet moments, Obinna sat in his sitting room, staring at the portraits of his family, his heart heavy with shame. He was a man broken by forces too powerful for him to fight. For Isabella, his only daughter, the downfall was more than just numbers on a balance sheet, it was the unraveling of her childhood security. She had grown up in comfort, attending one of the best private schools in Victoria Island, her dreams as wide as the ocean. But as the crisis deepened, she watched her father shrink before her eyes. The once booming laughter that filled their home was replaced with silence, broken only by his sighs. Her mother tried to hold the family together, praying fervently at night and whispering reassurances by day, but Isabella was old enough to see the truth: her father was drowning. Neighbors who used to bow before her father's convoy now looked at them with pity, and sometimes scorn. Creditors began visiting their home, banging on the gate until the security man grew weary of turning them away. Isabella remembered vividly the day her father sat her down, his eyes hollow, and told her that she might have to leave her school because they could no longer afford the fees. She had tried to act brave, but the tears betrayed her. In those moments, her anger toward Adeyemi, the unseen puppeteer pulling strings from afar, began to grow. When Chief Obinna finally collapsed one evening from a heart attack, his broken body could not withstand the weight of disgrace, and the Okafor family plunged into mourning. For Isabella, the funeral was not just the burial of her father, but the burial of the life she once knew. As the last clumps of red earth covered his coffin, she clenched her fists and vowed silently that she would never forgive the man whose shadow had destroyed her family, Chief Alexander Adeyemi. The house in Surulere was painfully quiet after the death of Chief Obinna. His absence left a void that seemed impossible to fill. Isabella's mother, Madame Chinyere, tried to keep her strength, but she was never the same again. She had spent her life as her husband's confidant and anchor, but now she walked about the compound like a shadow, barely eating, barely speaking. Isabella took on the burden of holding the family together, even though she was only in her early 20s. She took up small jobs, secretarial work, teaching part-time lessons, just to help keep food on the table. Yet, poverty was a cruel master. Neighbors who had once admired their wealth now offered them handouts, sometimes with condescension, sometimes with pity. Isabella despised it, despised the fact that her father's name was now a stain on people's lips. And at the center of her resentment was Chief Alexander Adeyemi. In her mind, he was the man who had orchestrated her father's fall, the man who wielded power like a sword to cut down anyone who stood in his way. But destiny, in its unpredictable cruelty, was not yet finished with her. It was a rainy evening when everything changed. Isabella had been clearing her mother's room after she had passed away from a sudden illness, her frail body finally giving in to grief and loneliness. As Isabella arranged clothes and packed old belongings into a trunk, she stumbled upon her mother's Bible. Its leather cover was worn from years of prayerful use. Flipping through the pages, Isabella noticed an envelope tucked neatly between Psalms and Proverbs. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside was a letter, folded and yellowed with age, addressed to one man, Chief Alexander Adeyemi. The handwriting was undoubtedly her mother's, neat yet trembling. The contents of the letter made Isabella's knees weaken. Her mother wrote of a love affair that predated her marriage to Chief Obinna, a relationship that had been cut off by circumstance and family pressure. She confessed that Isabella was the fruit of that secret love. "You must know the child we had together deserves acknowledgement, even if you cannot be part of her life," the letter read. Shock coursed through Isabella's veins as the words blurred before her eyes. The man she hated most in the world, the man who ruined her family, was possibly her biological father. The discovery turned her world upside down. She tore through old boxes in her mother's trunk and found more hidden pieces of evidence, faded photographs of her mother as a young woman standing beside Adeyemi, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders, small trinkets that could only have been gifts from a wealthy lover, and even a diary entry describing how her mother had been torn between loyalty to Adeyemi and the pressure to marry Obinna. The revelations were like knives twisting in Isabella's chest. She felt betrayed by her mother for keeping such a secret, betrayed by life itself for tying her bloodline to the very man she hated. Confusion consumed her. Should she accept this truth, or bury it with the rest of her pain? But Isabella was no coward. Deep within her, a fiery determination began to stir. If Adeyemi was truly her father, then he owed her answers. She would not allow herself to live in ignorance or bitterness forever. She resolved that she would find a way to enter his world, not as an outsider, not as an abandoned child, but as a woman determined to uncover the truth. The decision was not easy. Chief Alexander Adeyemi was no ordinary man. He was one of the most powerful billionaires in Nigeria, a man whose empire stretched across oil blocks, banking, real estate, and international trade. His company, Grayson Group, headquartered in Victoria Island, Lagos, was a fortress of glass and steel where only the most elite professionals walked its halls. To step into his world meant stepping into a den of power where ambition, betrayal, and greed thrived. But Isabella was fearless. She applied for a position at Grayson Group under a false name, using carefully forged documents. It was risky, but she was resourceful, and her intelligence made her stand out during the interviews. To her surprise, she was selected as a junior aide in the executive office, reporting directly to the corporate team that served Adeyemi himself. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. She knew this was her chance, the path to finally face the man who was her greatest enemy, and perhaps her father. Walking into Grayson Tower for the first time was like stepping into another world. The marble floors gleamed under bright lights, security guards moved with sharp precision, and polished executives in suits and designer gowns hurried past with purposeful strides. Isabella felt out of place at first, but her natural grace and determination carried her through. She worked diligently, taking notes, preparing documents, and handling errands, all while observing her surroundings like a hawk. She quickly realized that the company was not just a business but a kingdom, and Adeyemi was its king. His presence was everywhere, his portraits on the walls, his name in the mouths of employees who spoke with equal parts fear and reverence. But it wasn't until the day she saw him face to face that the full weight of her mission hit her. Adeyemi walked into the executive floor with the aura of a man who commanded not just attention, but respect. Tall, broad-shouldered, with streaks of gray at his temples, he carried himself with an elegance that concealed the ruthless reputation he bore. His deep voice filled the air as he gave instructions, and for the briefest moment, his eyes locked with Isabella's. She felt a chill run down her spine. From that moment on, her work became a dangerous game of proximity. Adeyemi seemed intrigued by her presence, though he said little. He would pause sometimes when speaking to her, as if something about her reminded him of someone he once knew. Isabella, for her part, hid her emotions behind a mask of professionalism, though her heart raced every time he entered the room. She couldn't deny the strange familiarity in his mannerisms, the way he frowned when deep in thought, or the way his voice carried warmth when he spoke of loyalty and family. It was a torment, hating him with every fiber of her being, yet suspecting he might be bound to her by blood. Meanwhile, whispers circulated within the office. Colleagues speculated about her sudden rise, and some muttered that her closeness to the boss was suspicious. Unbeknownst to Isabella, eyes were already on her. Among them were Adeyemi's children, particularly his ambitious son, Bamidele, who saw her as an intruder and a potential threat to his inheritance. It did not take long for the tension to grow. Adeyemi's empire was not just about money, it was about legacy. His children, raised in privilege, were already jockeying for positions of influence within the Grayson group. Bamidele, the eldest son, was the most ambitious and ruthless. He had been groomed to inherit the empire, and he guarded his father's favor jealously. When Isabella appeared in the executive office, Bamidele's sharp instincts were immediately aroused. She was efficient, intelligent, and quietly confident. Worse still, his father seemed to notice her in ways he did not notice others. Though Adeyemi was not a man of many words, there were subtle glances, small questions, and even rare smiles directed at Isabella. It was enough to make Bamidele restless. At first, he dismissed her as another opportunist trying to curry favor, but as days turned into weeks, his suspicion hardened into hostility. He began quietly digging into her background, determined to unmask her. Isabella, meanwhile, continued her delicate balancing act. Every day in the office was like walking on a razor's edge. On one hand, she needed to perform well to maintain her cover. On the other, she was studying Adeyemi, trying to discern whether the man was the villain she had painted in her mind or someone far more complex. The contradictions unsettled her. He was firm and commanding, yet she noticed how he treated the lowest staff with unexpected kindness. He was feared for his business ruthlessness, yet in private moments he seemed weary, as though carrying unspoken regrets. And then there were the subtle remarks, like the time he told her, "You remind me of someone I once knew." The words haunted her for days. Did he suspect? Did he know something? Or was it merely a coincidence? Isabella's heart warred with her mind. She wanted to scream at him, to confront him with her mother's letter, to demand answers, but fear of rejection and humiliation kept her silent. The web of intrigue tightened as whispers spread beyond the office. Some executives speculated about Isabella's closeness to Adeyemi, hinting at scandal. Rivals outside the company began asking questions, sensing an opportunity to destabilize the billionaire's empire. Within the Adeyemi household, the tension became palpable. Bamidele confronted his father subtly, asking why he allowed outsiders so close, but Adeyemi brushed him off with a cryptic statement, "Sometimes blood recognizes blood even when the mind has not yet caught up." The remark only deepened Bamidele's suspicion. Isabella could feel the pressure mounting around her, like walls closing in. The secret she carried was too heavy to remain buried for long, but revealing it could either bring her redemption or destroy her completely. The stage was set for a clash of truths, ambition, and betrayal that would shake the Adeyemi Empire to its core. The longer Isabella remained inside the walls of Grayson Group, the more she realized that the company was not just a place of business, but a fortress of secrets. Every corner of the sprawling headquarters seemed to hum with unspoken rivalries, hushed conversations, and whispers of betrayal. For most employees, the rule was simple: keep your head down, do your work, and never cross the invisible boundaries that surrounded Chief Adeyemi's empire. But Isabella was not there just to survive, she was there to uncover truth. She began spending late evenings in the records department, combing through financial documents, old contracts, and newspaper archives. What she discovered unsettled her deeply. Many of the moves that had crippled her late stepfather's company seemed to trace back not directly to Adeyemi, but to a series of suspicious contracts orchestrated by Obina's former business partner, Chief Namdi, and a corrupt commissioner in Lagos State. The deeper she dug, the clearer the pattern became. Namdi had betrayed Obina, feeding inside information to government officials who were secretly aligned with Adeyemi's rivals. It dawned on her that perhaps Adeyemi was not the puppet master she had believed. Maybe he was simply the face that everyone blamed because his company profited from the chaos. The possibility sent shivers down her spine. Could it be that she had spent years hating the wrong man? Yet suspicion was not enough to erase years of bitterness. Isabella wrestled with herself nightly, torn between her desire to prove Adeyemi guilty and her growing realization that the story might not be so simple. Every time she saw him in the office, commanding yet strangely lonely, she felt the pull of conflicting emotions. One evening, she overheard two senior executives whispering in the hallway. Their words froze her in place. It wasn't Chief Adeyemi who ordered the takeover, it was the commissioner in ease. Adeyemi warned against it, but by the time he intervened, Okafor Motors was already gone. The executives did not notice her as they moved on, but their conversation confirmed her suspicions. Isabella realized she was chasing ghosts of the past, driven by inherited anger. Still, she could not simply walk up to Adeyemi and ask for the truth. To do so would expose her identity and her mission. Instead, she kept collecting fragments of evidence, piecing them together slowly like shards of a shattered mirror. But as she did, she also became more noticeable in the office. The more late nights she spent poring through documents, the more questions people asked. Eyes followed her in the corridors. Whispers grew louder, and shadows seemed to lengthen around her. Among those shadows was Bamidele, Adeyemi's eldest son. Ambitious and paranoid, he began to see Isabella as more than just a nosy staff member. He noticed how his father sometimes paused when she spoke, how his gaze softened whenever she entered the room. For Bamidele, who had spent years fighting for his father's approval, Isabella was an intruder, a dangerous threat to everything he believed belonged to him. He started planting spies in the office, instructing them to monitor her every move. Soon, reports began to reach him about her late nights in the records department, her constant interest in the company's history, and her subtle questioning of senior staff. The puzzle began to take shape in Bamidele's mind. This woman was not just an ambitious assistant, she was digging for something, and if he didn't act fast, she might uncover a secret that could shake the Adeyemi Empire to its foundation. In his mind, there was only one solution: to destroy her before she destroyed him. Bamidele had always been a man of fire. From childhood, he had been raised to believe he was the crown prince of his father's empire, destined to inherit everything that Chief Alexander Adeyemi had built. Yet he carried a constant wound, a father who, despite giving him every advantage, seemed impossible to please. Adeyemi demanded perfection, and when Bamidele failed, he responded with icy silence instead of encouragement. Over the years, this silent disapproval grew into resentment, a gnawing hunger for validation that never came. So when Isabella arrived, seemingly out of nowhere, and began to capture Adeyemi's quiet attention, it was more than Bamidele could bear. She was a threat, not only to his position in the company but also to the fragile connection he had spent years trying to forge with his father. To him, her very existence was an insult, and hatred for her burned like acid in his veins. His first move was subtle. He ordered a private investigator to look into Isabella's background. At first, the results confused him. The name she used at Grayson Group was genuine enough, but there were gaps in her records, schools that didn't match, employment histories that seemed patched together. He realized quickly that she was hiding her true identity. That discovery thrilled him. If she was an imposter, then he could expose her publicly, and in the process, regain his father's trust. But as the investigator dug deeper, Bamidele began to sense that the truth was far more dangerous. The investigator reported finding a faint connection between Isabella's late mother, Madame Chinyere Okafor, and Adeyemi himself. Old photographs, scattered rumors, and even a record of a business conference decades ago where the two were spotted together. Suddenly, the pieces clicked. Isabella was not just a fraud, she might be blood. The realization filled Bamidele with horror. If it was true, then his position as heir was under direct threat. He could not allow it. From that day forward, Bamidele declared war. He began setting traps for Isabella at the office, assigning her impossible tasks, planting false rumors, and even trying to turn colleagues against her. But Isabella was stronger than he anticipated. She worked tirelessly, her determination unshaken. Every attempt to humiliate her only seemed to sharpen her resolve. This enraged him even more. Bamidele shifted to more desperate tactics. He intercepted documents she had been reviewing, ensuring that anything connecting Namdi's and the corrupt commissioner disappeared before she could see it. He even confronted her in private once, his voice dripping with menace, "You don't belong here. Leave now, while you still can." Isabella stood her ground, refusing to back down, but she knew she was walking a dangerous path. The hatred in Bamidele's eyes was not the hatred of a rival colleague, it was the hatred of a man who saw her as a threat to his very existence. A dangerous discovery. The storm came one fateful evening when Isabella, undeterred by Bamidele's threats, stumbled upon a set of confidential files hidden deep within the archives of the company. It was almost by accident. She had been searching for records of transport contracts from the time of her father's downfall when she discovered a locked cabinet tucked behind dusty shelves. Using the skills she had honed from months of quiet investigation, she managed to pry it open. Inside were documents that confirmed her growing suspicions. The collapse of Okafor Motors had been orchestrated not by Adeyemi directly, but by a web of betrayal spun by Chief Namdi, who had leaked sensitive company information to the Commissioner of Transport. In exchange, Namdi had received lucrative government contracts, while the Commissioner pocketed bribes. Adeyemi's name appeared in the documents, but only as a buyer who acquired the struggling company after its collapse. For years, Isabella had believed Adeyemi had wielded the knife, but now she saw that he had only picked up the pieces after others had done the cutting. The revelation was both liberating and devastating. All her hatred, all her bitterness, it had been aimed at the wrong man. Her hands trembled as she stuffed the documents into her bag. She needed time to process what she had just discovered, but fate did not give her the chance. On her way out of the archives, she ran into Bamidele, who had been shadowing her for days. His eyes fell on the bulging bag, and a wicked smile spread across his face. "What do you have there?" he asked, his voice dripping with false casualness. Isabella tried to brush past him, but he blocked her path. With a swift movement, he snatched the bag from her hands and pulled out the documents. As he scanned the pages, his smile twisted into a sneer. "So this is what you've been digging for? Do you really think you can walk into my father's empire and rewrite history? You're nothing, Isabella. Nothing!" His voice echoed through the empty corridor. Isabella's heart pounded as she realized how much danger she was in. Bamidil now held the very evidence that could expose both the betrayal of her father's company and her own connection to Adeyemi. The confrontation escalated into a tense standoff. Isabella pleaded with him to return the documents, explaining that the truth mattered more than his inheritance. But Bamidil only laughed bitterly. "You don't understand," he said, his voice low and trembling with rage. "If my father finds out who you really are, I lose everything. And I will not let that happen." With that, he tore some of the documents in half and threatened to destroy the rest unless Isabella disappeared from their lives forever. Desperation surged through her veins. She knew she could not overpower him physically, but she also knew she could not let him bury the truth. Summoning every ounce of courage, she told him, "You can tear paper, Bamidil, but you can't tear destiny. The truth will come out, whether you like it or not." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. But instead of backing down, he walked away with the documents, leaving Isabella in the corridor, her heart shattered but her resolve burning stronger than ever. She would not give up. If anything, the danger only made her more determined to bring the truth to light. The Adeyemi family's influence stretched far beyond boardrooms and contracts. It extended into the heart of Lagos society, where power was flaunted like a badge of honor. Chief Adeyemi's 60th birthday celebration was not just a party, but a declaration of dominance. The Grand Eco Hotel hall was draped in gold and white, with senators, governors, business magnates, and celebrities in attendance. For most guests, the night was a chance to be seen, to toast the billionaire who commanded respect across Nigeria. For Isabella, however, the gala was the battlefield where truth and deceit would finally clash. She had debated attending at all, knowing Bamidil would be watching her like a hawk, but something inside her told her that destiny had chosen this moment. Dressed in a borrowed evening gown, she slipped into the glittering hall, her heart thudding like a drumbeat. The air was thick with music, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses, but beneath the glamour, Isabella sensed tension. Unspoken rivalries coiled like snakes beneath the polished smiles. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on Bamidil, who was whispering into the ear of a senator, his gaze flicking back toward her with malice. She knew he was planning something, and her instincts proved right sooner than she imagined. The speeches began as the night deepened. Guests praised Adeyemi's brilliance, his contributions to Nigeria's economy, his philanthropy. Then it was Bamidil's turn to speak. He stepped forward, his agbada gleaming under the chandelier, his voice smooth but cold as he addressed the crowd. At first, he spoke of loyalty, of heritage, of carrying on his father's empire. But then, his words took a venomous turn. "Tonight, as we celebrate my father, it pains me to reveal that we are not all safe in his empire. Among us hides a deceiver, a woman who wormed her way into our company with lies and false pretenses." Gasps rippled through the hall as his eyes locked on Isabella. "This woman claims kinship with my father, but in truth, she is nothing but a fraud seeking to steal what is not hers." The spotlight turned toward Isabella, pinning her in place as dozens of eyes stared. The humiliation was suffocating, but rage surged within her stronger than fear. Slowly, she rose to her feet, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "If it is fraud you want to speak of, Bamidil, then let us speak of truth." She reached into her clutch and pulled out her mother's letter and a salvaged copy of the documents Bamidil had tried to destroy. The hall fell deathly silent. With trembling hands, Isabella read aloud her mother's confession of love with Adeyemi, the letter revealing her paternity. Murmurs erupted, scandal crashing through the hall like thunder. She then held up the contracts, exposing how Chief Namdi and the corrupt commissioner betrayed Obinna and orchestrated the collapse of his company while Adeyemi's name was used as a shield. The guests shifted uneasily, torn between disbelief and shock. Bamidil lunged forward, trying to snatch the papers, but Adeyemi himself rose from his seat, his booming voice halting the chaos. "Enough," he thundered, his eyes blazing. "This matter will not be buried under lies tonight." His gaze turned to Isabella, softening as he took the letter from her trembling hands. He read it silently, and for the first time in decades, the mask of the invincible billionaire cracked. His shoulders slumped as though a great weight had been laid bare before the world. When he finally looked up, his voice carried both pain and conviction. "This woman speaks the truth. She is my daughter." The hall erupted, some gasped, others whispered, cameras flashed, but all Isabella could feel was the ground shifting beneath her feet. The secret she had carried in silence was now unveiled for all to see. The revelation spread like wildfire. By the next morning, headlines across Nigeria screamed with scandal: "Billionaire Adeyemi acknowledges secret daughter." Some praised his honesty, others mocked him for weakness, and still others speculated about the implications for inheritance and succession. But inside Adeyemi's mansion, the storm was far from over. Isabella was invited into his private study, where the man she had once hated now sat with weary eyes, gesturing for her to sit. The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock as Adeyemi spoke. "I did not know," he said finally, his voice heavy. "Your mother left without a word. By the time I searched, she was gone, married, living a life far from mine. I thought she wanted nothing more to do with me." Isabella's throat tightened, her hands clenched on her lap. "She left because she felt betrayed," Isabella whispered. "She thought you chose ambition over her." Adeyemi closed his eyes, pained. "Perhaps she was right. I was blinded by the hunger to build this empire. And in doing so, I lost her, and you." His words sliced through Isabella's bitterness, but anger lingered. "And what of my father, Obinna?" she pressed. "He died in disgrace while you thrived." Adeyemi sighed. "That shame will haunt me until my last breath. But believe me when I say I did not strike the blow. Namdi and the commissioner did. They used my name, and though I profited, it was not by design. I have lived with that guilt, even as the world called me a conqueror." For Isabella, the confession was both balm and poison. To learn that Adeyemi was not the architect of her stepfather's ruin was a relief, but it also left her burdened with grief for years wasted in hatred. She sat in silence, tears streaming down her face, as Adeyemi reached across the desk to clasp her trembling hands. "You are my daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "I cannot change the past, but I can fight for your future. No one, not even Bamidele, will take that from you." The mention of Bamidele made Isabella shiver. His humiliation at the gala had been public, and she knew he would not forgive her. True to her fears, Bamidele burst into the study unannounced, his face twisted with rage. "This is madness," he shouted. "Father, you will not throw away your legacy for this woman. She is nothing but a reminder of your shame." Adeyemi's eyes hardened, his voice sharp as steel. "Careful, Bamidele. You speak not only of her but of me. Blood cannot be denied." But Bamidele's hatred boiled over, and he spat, "Then you are no father of mine." He stormed out, leaving behind a trail of shattered loyalty and broken pride. Isabella's chest ached as she realized the war had only just begun. In the days that followed, Adeyemi moved swiftly to protect Isabella. He reinstated her late father's name in public, acknowledging Obinna as a man wronged by betrayal. He announced the revival of Okafor Motors under Isabella's leadership, with funding from Grayson Group. The decision shook the business world once again. Some applauded the act as justice, while others saw it as favoritism. Meanwhile, Bamidele retreated into the shadows, plotting in silence. Rumors swirled that he was allying with rivals to take down both Isabella and his father. Yet through it all, Isabella stood firm. Though fear gnawed at her, she found strength in the knowledge that she was no longer fighting alone. For the first time in her life, she had been acknowledged, not just as the daughter of a disgraced man, but as the rightful heir of truth. The final storm came not with whispers but with fire. Bamadiel, in a desperate bid to reclaim his position, leaked damaging documents to the press, portraying Isabella as a manipulative fraud and Adeyemi as a weak old man enslaved by guilt. The scandal rocked Lagos, and for a moment it seemed Isabella's fragile redemption would crumble. But Adeyemi was no stranger to battles. He called a press conference at Grayson Towers, standing side by side with Isabella before the flashing cameras. His voice thundered with the weight of truth as he recounted the betrayals of the past, admitting his failures, but also declaring his daughter's rightful place in his life and legacy. For too long, he said, I allowed silence to bury the truth. No more. This is my daughter. This is my blood. And together, we will rebuild what was broken. His words reverberated across Nigeria, silencing critics and shifting public sympathy toward Isabella. The narrative changed. She was no longer a fraud, she was a survivor, a symbol of truth breaking through corruption. Behind the scenes, Bamadiel's schemes collapsed under their own weight. The allies he had courted turned against him once Adeyemi froze his access to the family fortune. Cornered and disgraced, he disappeared from public view, leaving Isabella free to step into the role fate had carved for her. With Adeyemi's backing, she took the helm of the revived Okafor Motors, infusing it with fresh vision while honoring her late stepfather's legacy. The company began to thrive again, providing jobs to hundreds and restoring dignity to the Okafor name. Isabella also reconciled with her ailing mother, who wept tears of relief upon learning that Adeyemi had claimed her openly. For Chinyere, the years of silence and secrecy had ended. For Isabella, the years of bitterness had given way to a new dawn. It was not a perfect ending, scars remained, and relationships would take time to heal, but it was a beginning built on truth. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Isabella stood with Adeyemi at the graveside of her late stepfather. The cemetery was calm, the breeze rustling through the trees as she laid fresh flowers on the grave. Adeyemi placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low but steady. I cannot erase the past, my child. But I promise you this, I will stand with you in the future. Isabella closed her eyes, letting the words sink into her soul. For years, she had been the daughter of secrets, a woman defined by pain and unanswered questions. Now, she was something more, the daughter of resilience, the heir of two legacies, and a woman finally at peace with herself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the gravesite, Isabella smiled through her tears. For the first time in her life, she was no longer alone. She had found her place, not just in Adeyemi's world, but in her own destiny. Thank you for watching Blackman Folk Tales. Don't forget to like and subscribe.